Here we'll deal with one more example of converting speed units. We're given that the speed of sound, also called Mach 1, is 343 meters per second. If a jet flies at Mach 3, which is 3 times the speed of sound, what is its speed in miles per hour? Let's first take into account that we're flying 3 times the speed I've indicated here. So begin by taking 3 times 343 meters per second. Let's go to the calculator first. We enter 3 multiply 343, and when we press enter, our speed will be 1,029 meters per second. With this in mind, let's write what we have and what we need. Right now we have 1,029 meters over seconds. Since I have no number for seconds, I can place the invisible 1 next to seconds. However, I need mph, and let's remind ourselves that stands for miles per hour. And most critically, the per stands for division. So we can say we need miles on top of a fraction and hours on the bottom of a fraction. That means we'll need to change meters over to miles, and we'll also need to change seconds over to hours. We'll label meters to miles as our part A conversion, and our seconds to hours as our part B conversion. We'll break this up into 2 pieces, A and B, and handle these conversions separately. For part A, I'll write that I have meters to start with, and I need to go to miles eventually. Meters is a metric unit, whereas miles is a US unit. So I'll need to make a metric to US conversion somewhere along the trail. Notice we do not have a meters to miles conversion, but what I have given you here is a kilometers to miles conversion. So next to miles, I'll write that at some point I could go from kilometers to miles and get there. Now, kilometers is a metric unit, and thankfully you can change between metric units all you like. So since my first unit, meters, is metric, and my second unit, kilometers, is also metric, I can definitely make that conversion. So my first step will be meters to kilometers, which I'll label with a number 1, and kilometers to miles, which I'll label with a number 2. The piece of information I gave you here at the end of the question, miles to kilometers, I will label that with a number 2 to show that will be our second fraction. We'll just need to remember what our meters to kilometers conversion is. Recall that if I want kilo as my unit, 1 kilo of anything is 1,000 of that base unit. Recalling that kilo stands for 1,000. That means that kilometers to meters conversion will be my first move. I'll label that with a number 1. Let's start with the number of meters that we have. The meters we'll start with is 1,029, not the 343, because that's only Mach 1. We want Mach 3, which is 1,029. Label that with meters, and multiply that by 2 fractions, because we'll have 2 steps. The meters we start with will go to the bottom, and at the end of step 1 we want kilometers. Then those kilometers go to the bottom, and the unit we want at the end is miles. For our first fraction, we have 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters. 1 will go next to kilometers, 1,000 will go next to meters. Then in my second fraction, I have 1 mile is 1.61 kilometers, so 1 will go next to miles. 1.61 will go next to kilometers, because that's the unit conversion I boxed in here in green. Let's check our units briefly to start with. We started with meters. That will cancel out in the bottom of the first fraction. Then we got kilometers, but that will cancel out in the bottom of the second fraction, and this will give me miles. When I enter this into my calculator, I can expect to get miles as my answer. I will now take 1,029, divide by 1,000, divide by 1.61. We'll be skipping over the times ones. With 1,029 in my calculator, I will divide by 1,000 and press enter, but then right after that, I'll divide by 1.61. This gives me 0.639. As we know, miles will be our unit for part A. Now we look to part B. We started out with 1 second from the invisible 1. We'll write that we start with seconds, and what we want to have at the end of part B is hours. So our conversion will be seconds to hours. Let's recall that 1 hour, when we're dealing with time, is 3,600 seconds. So we'll start with 1 second, multiply that by a fraction to get out of seconds, which we place on the bottom, and get into hours, which we place on the top. This is because at the end of part B, we want to have hours. We place our 1 next to hours and 3,600 next to seconds. Therefore, my operation is 1 times 1, which would give me 1, divided by 3,600, which should give me a small decimal. Let's go to the calculator with that now. We'll enter 1, divide by 3,600. When we press enter, we get 0.000278. A very tiny decimal indeed. Now we check our units. The seconds we start with will cancel out with the bottom of the first fraction and leave us with hours for our unit. Now all we have to do is take the 0.639 and divide by this tiny decimal, 0.000278. When we divide, we will get miles over hours. Let's go to the calculator and handle that math. We enter 0.639 and divide by 0.000278. We'll be rounding this a little bit, so it won't be exact, but it will be close enough for our purposes in this class. When we press enter, we get 2298.56. I'll round this up to the nearest whole number and say 2299. Therefore, our final answer will be 2,299 miles per hour. This will be our speed for the jet.